Let me show you how to teach beginners using an effective methodology that I created called the 5 points. This is video number 3 in the series. So if you missed video number 1 or video number 2, do yourself a favor and watch those first because we're going to be referencing some of that information. And I highly recommend getting a piece of paper and a pen and writing all this stuff down. Oh, and if you could just, okay. Most teachers teach beginners in a really chaotic way. They tend to teach way too much vocabulary, and the lesson ends with the students really being confused because there's not an overreaching goal for teaching all of these terms. What you want to do instead is end your lessons with real life communication. So what this is going to look like for a beginner class is about 3 to 5 questions that students can ask each other and give answers to in real time without the use of notes. So I'm going to think of those 3 to 5 questions first. I want them all to be topical related, and I want them all to kind of make sense in a real life conversation, even if we're planning it for a very low level. Let's put some examples up. I've got one here, which is all about living situations. And this one over here is about daily activities. We got a third one up here, which is about wearing clothing and different types of clothing you might wear in different situations. And a final one here, which is about jobs. We're going to work on this one here for our actual lesson. If you look at the questions, you can see that they're all similar in that they're dealing with the same topic or theme, and they're all in the same grammatical tense, which is good. But they're all slightly different. And the point of this is that each question is going to bring out different kinds of vocab, which is good because you want things to sound realistic. And when people talk, they don't just ask the same question over and over again. Also notice with these questions, I'm using really authentic language. The first question, I didn't ask, what's your job? Because that just doesn't sound realistic, right? It sounds kind of fake or weird. What do you do for a living is a much better phrase, so why not teach that? And some of you might think, but it's beginners. Why would you teach them something that's so nuanced? It doesn't really work that way. Even at the beginner level, I want to teach the language that they're naturally going to use. Why teach them something that sounds strange? It just doesn't make any sense. Once I have those questions planned, I'm going to pull out every single noun, adjective, verb, part of speech that will come up in both the asking and answering of the question. If a word doesn't come up in the answer, I'm not going to teach it. And this part is extremely important because I'm not just teaching different kinds of jobs. I'm also teaching the places where the jobs are held, like a school or a hospital. I'm teaching part-time or full-time, and then I'm also teaching language around if they like the job or not, yes or no. Because if I just teach jobs, 14 different careers or 10 different careers, they're not going to be able to answer these other questions. So thinking about the answer, the language that they need to successfully answer that question is how you make this whole thing work. I've thought of my questions, I've thought of my answers, and I've pulled out all of the words that I think that they're going to need to be able to complete this. And this is what it looks like here. So this is what I think they're going to need to be able to ask and answer these questions effectively. And now that I have that, we can go through the 5 points. Point 1 of the 5 points is to teach and practice your vocab. Guys, I did a whole video of this in video number 2. Please watch that and check it out because it'll take about 10 minutes for me to go over all of those tips, and that's a waste of your time. But essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be eliciting all of my words out with non-verbal, usually visual elicits. I'm going to board them up correctly. We're going to drill them 10 times. I'm going to put all these words up, and then we're going to CCQ them. So for example, I'll show them a picture. This is what is she? She's a doc something. What? Anybody? Good. A doctor. We'll drill it. A doctor, a doctor, a doctor, a doctor. Don't skip your drilling with beginners. They really need that pronunciational practice. I'll do my second word. This is a, where she works, and this is a school? No, it's a good. Hospital, same exact thing. Drill it 10 times or so. I'm gonna do that with all of my words. Once I get these all up on the board, we're gonna do a rapid fire, fast CCQ check, going through them all. And I'm going to end point 1 with a written study, usually like a gap fill to help them practice writing the words down. Remember, when they're doing their study 1, I want to erase this stuff. I want them to be able to write the word down on their own without the use of the board. The goal for point 1 is that students really need to know these words. They need to say them correctly, they need to spell them correctly, and they need to be able to identify them fast. This is going to take some time, so it's usually about 10 to 15 minutes that I'll spend here. But if I move on to point 2 without a lot of practice, it's all going to fall apart. Point 2, elicit and practice the answer to my first question. A lot of teachers, when they're teaching beginners, start by asking their students questions. Don't do this, it's bad. If students don't really understand the question and they don't have any practice answering the question, they're not going to be able to do that, and they're just going to look at you with these blank faces. So instead, I want to practice that answer. So what do you do for a living? I will simply come up and I'll elicit this response out. So and I'll write I up on the board. And then I'll show them one of the pictures of one of the professions, and they know this, so they'll say doctor, and I go, correct. And then I'll elicit the verb that should go here. And they'll probably eventually put am, right? Of course, in real life, I'll be writing this up on the board, but I find with these videos, if I write and I'm filming, the glare is kind of off. But I will just simply trail the right answer out for them. And it's likely that they might give me something wrong, but I will lead them to the correct language. So once we have this full phrase up on the board, I'm a doctor, I'm going to just drill it over and over again. I'm just going to get them to say, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor. It seems a little bit repetitive, but if they are true beginners, they'll need some time just formulating these sounds. And while they're doing this, I can work on contractions. So not I am a doctor, but I'm a doctor. Get them to say it about 4 or 5 times or so. And then what I can begin doing is taking all of my other pictures for the different professions, and they can substitute it. So one might be I'm a doctor. The next one is a picture of a teacher, and they'll say I'm a teacher. The next one is a banker, I'm a banker, and so on. Once they are able to give the answer for question number 1, I will then elicit out the actual question. And this is point 3. So I, on my board, can write a question mark so they understand that it's a question. And then I will elicit the actual question. So what do you do for a living, etc. Now you might be thinking, they're not going to be able to do that, but you'll be surprised because language is logical. And since they've practiced this statement a bunch, and since we've gone over this language already in point number 1, oftentimes many of the students will be able to fill in these blanks pretty easily. But if they can't, like anything else with eliciting, I'm pulling that up. I mean, I can have blanks for the words, and then they have to be able to give me the correct question. The next step in point 3 is we just practice saying it. We're just going to drill it about 4 times with it up on the board, maybe even more than that. And the idea behind this is I want my students to be comfortable just asking this question. I found that beginner students, they might even understand everything that's going on, but if their mouth and their mind isn't used to kind of putting it all together, it's really difficult and it makes it really choppy. So we'll just start saying this a couple times. What do you do for a living? What do you do for a living? Let's do it faster. What do you do for a living? What do you do for a living? Work on speed, work on contractions, work on that natural sounding language, and do it to the point where students just feel comfortable asking it now. Now students have practiced the question. They've practiced the answer to the question and different variables. The next step is they put it together. And that's what point 3 is. It's being able to ask a single question and answer to your dialogue. At first, we can practice this a little bit in front of the whole class, but eventually I'll put them into pairs or groups. I'll give them some of the profession prompts, so like pictures of the different professions, and they will go back and forth with each other asking and answering question number 1. While they're doing this, I'm going to erase the board. I'm not going to have them use their notes, and they can just practice going back and forth. Some people watching this might be, that seems kind of pointless, like they're just doing the same thing over and over again, but they're not. They're using different prompts. So they have to use the vocab that they learned in point 1 in an actual question and answer, and that's where this practice comes from. And I'm going to stick here with question 1, question and answer, for a while. I'll do it until they really have it down. Once my students have a good handle on question 1, we then move on to question number 2, and we're going to handle this the same way we did with question 1. So we essentially go back to point 2. I'm going to elicit out the statement or the answer for question 2. We're going to say that a couple of times. I'm going to then add substitutions for it a little bit. When they get a handle on that, I'm going to erase the board, and they're going to give me those substitutions like they did in question number 1. And as you can imagine, then the next step is we do the question for question number 2. We practice that. Then I put them into groups, and they practice with each other. Question number 2, question and answer, with all of those different substitutions. And we're going to do that for all of my questions. Question 1, question 2, question 3. If you have 5 questions, you're going to do question 4 or 5. However many questions that you have, you're going to do the same setup with a lot of practice, a lot of drilling, a lot of pronunciational work, but also a tremendous amount of variable substitution. So they are changing their answers depending on what prompts they have in front of them. By point 4, we have our communication activity practice in chunks, but now it's time to put it all together. Don't just go into your role play right now. Point 4 is all about practicing the whole thing with a little bit of guidance. So I'll give them some prompts and some help. I'll put them in groups, and they can go through all of the questions at once. It's important to give them some help because they'll still need it at this time. But as they start doing it, I'll begin to slowly remove a lot of this help, get them to not use their notes, etc. And we'll go through this multiple times. So I'll stay here in this section until I've removed everything and they're able to do the activity without too many issues. I'll end point 4 with a little written study, probably like a dialogue fill. I find that having a written study after a lot of speaking really solidifies this information because they can see it all again, and it really tests if they know everything. We're here in point 5. So much drilling, so much practice, and now they're ready to do it all on their own. And point 5 looks a lot like point 4, but there's no notes at all. And I'm going to add a little bit of natural language. This can be your hellos, your goodbyes, how are you? I can also encourage them maybe to come up with some of their own answers to these questions if it makes sense. If they want to incorporate some past language that we've learned in different lessons, that's great. I always think with any student that if they can use a little bit of their own language, it's always beneficial, so push that a bit. And the way that this works is I'm going to get all of my students to stand up and we're going to do a mingle, and I'm going to hand everybody a roll card, and each roll card is going to be different. And the reason for this is I don't want them saying the same thing over and over again. I want them to constantly be having to create a different profession, a different location, whether it's part-time or full-time, etc. So everybody gets something like this. We get them up, we get them practicing. And to keep it interesting, after they go through a round with a student, they can take the other student's roll card, so now they have different things that they need to answer. Don't have them do this once, have them do it many times. And while they're doing it, I can push speed, I can push pronunciation, I can push contractions, I can get them to truly sound like fluent English speakers. And they have this practice so they can experiment and push themselves as well. And of course, if you find your students have a mastery of this and they're getting a little bit bored by it, switch it up a bit. Add some different professions or different locations, add another question, add negatives. There's a lot of things that you can do to add on to this activity to make it fun and exciting. But as mentioned again, it's about mastery, so just get them to do it quick and fast. While this is going on and your students are talking and interacting with each other in real time, there's a lot of fun and euphoria in the class. You've removed the training wheels, and it's almost like someone riding a bike for the first time. They're doing it all on their own, and more importantly, it makes sense to them. They're able to ask the questions really well. They're able to give the answers back really quickly. It all sounds great. They feel comfortable with it enough that they can even add their own substitutions. And it might be the first time in their lives that they feel like they can really speak well. And this is such a fun time in your classes, which is why I love teaching beginners, and I always will. There are two main things that I like with this methodology. One is that it pushes real life speaking at the lowest level possible, which is great because that's what you want. You don't want classes which are just filling in the blanks or multiple choice and all that nonsense. You want real speaking, and this methodology will get you there. Second thing that I like about this, and this is more from the teacher side, is that in the lesson, I know exactly where I am. And I also know if there's a problem. If we get to point 5 and students can't do the role play, I just pop back into point 4 and practice a bit. If we're at point 4 and students are unable to answer all of the questions at the same time, we can pop back to point 3 or point 2 and practice a bit. And this is great because so many times with beginners, if things don't go well, it's like, what am I gonna do? Like, they don't understand anything, no one's participating. But with this methodology, you know exactly what you need to do wherever you're at. And that are the 5 points. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Next video is going to be a Q&A on beginners. We'll go over some finer points. But as always, good luck in your classes.